Hi, everyone. I am so excited about this topic, and thank you so much for joining me. For the next 40 minutes, we're going to talk about advanced strategies for cognitive performance, especially for the woman's brain. And so today, we are, quite frankly, in a brain health crisis. Over 40% of adults are reporting anxiety and depression. 20% of adults are saying they have complete brain exhaustion, which shows up as brain fog. We're getting insomnia, and 55 million people have dementia. And this number is expected to double every 20 years. Quite frankly, we truly are in a brain health crisis. Now, the good news is with the skills and strategies that I'm going to show you today, this is not going to be your fate. All right. So first, I'll tell you a little bit about me. Is it moving on? All right. So this was me in 2016. Everything really changed for me on one beautiful, warm day in September. But first, before that, 2016, I was doing great. This is me getting an award from the mayor. I was running a very successful multidisciplinary clinic in Markham, bringing up 2 children. And then one September morning, everything changed. Now, let me set the scene for you. So my daughter had stayed home from school the day before because she was feeling under the weather. She had a sore throat. And so I let her stay home, but it didn't seem that bad. It had been a long weekend. We had gone to the zoo. So a lot of things had happened. Well, that morning I said, sweetheart, I think you're okay. You can go to school. She ran downstairs, grabbed the biggest knife she could find off our butcher block, held it to held the knife to her throat, and said, Mommy, if you make me go to school, I'm going to kill myself. That put us down a very long, difficult, but very informative journey. She was diagnosed in the 95th percentile of anxiety. We were told that yes, she might kill herself, not because she was depressed, but because she was so emotionally dysregulated that she couldn't control herself. She dropped out of school. My daughter was a grade 5 dropout. She was hospitalized. But it just didn't feel right for me. Here I was giving lectures to psychotherapists on brain health, on anxiety and depression. How could I possibly have missed that my daughter was in the 95th percentile? So I dug and I dug. Does anybody want to put a guess of what got her back to school? 5 days, 5 days of antibiotics, and she was back at school. I am now on a mission to change the way the world views brain health. I have cured people from anxiety, depression, brain fog, peripheral neuropathy, even symptoms that look like schizophrenia, because they weren't anxiety, depression, schizophrenia. Those were simply symptoms of what the patient was experiencing. And when we were able to dig down and find what that root cause was, we were able to reverse it. Now, I used to send my patients to Dr. Daniel Amen in the States, because we need to understand what's happening with the brain. But it was really expensive. So if you have $5,000 extra dollars, $10,000 lying around, I still highly suggest you do it. He's going to do a PET scan of your brain, and we're going to see where there might be some deficiencies. But you really need more than 5,000. You need 10 for the first scan and probably 10 for the second, because we want to be able to reproduce it. We want to see what's happening. And so I did digging, and I'm so excited that I actually now have a brain scan in my clinic. It's not as good as Dr. Amen's, but it gives us a lot of information. We know that, Tony Robbins says the change only happens when the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of change. I say change happens when we have measurable metrics and we have something to work towards. And so by being able to measure your brain with this non-invasive, affordable, quick, and it's reproducible, we can get some quick answers. So how did we get here? How did we get in this place where we are so far removed from what we need to do for our brain? Well, we've been fed a lot of lies and a lot of misinformation over the years. And today we're going to cut through the clutter, and we're going to know what you need to do for optimal brain. One of the myths that's been perpetuated on us as women is that women, yes, you have a higher risk of getting dementia, but that's because you live longer. So really it's a good thing, right? That is not why we have a higher risk of getting dementia. And I'm going to quickly say, I'm going to use the term dementia because that's what the research has done. But What I'm talking about is a sharp, focused, quick, non-fatigued brain. So I will have to use the word dementia when I'm looking at studies, but really that's what I'm looking for you. Another problem that we've had over the last 40 years is when they look at brain scans, they're thinking that men and women's brains are the same, and they're treating us the same way. This is not working for men. We've been told dementia is an old person disease. It's not. We're seeing brain changes as early as 35. We've been told estrogen is bad. We've been told serotonin deficiency is a thing. It's not. It's not a thing. We're not going to have time to get to that today. But huge studies have come out to show that serotonin deficiency is not a thing. We've been told that dementia is predetermined and there's nothing you can do about it. They're leaving us feeling helpless and disempowered. Well, I'm here to bring back that power. We've been told that fat is bad. It's not. Oh, probably one of the biggest myths, the biggest misinformation, and this was actually put onto us on purpose, was that fat is bad and sugar is good. If any of you grew up in the 80s, we were told that, carbs was the way to go to lose weight. I remember going off to university and making myself a big vat of spaghetti and a big container of orange juice. I would get that concentrated orange juice that you could make into a big jug, and I would happily sit and drink that, thinking I was being so healthy. When I try to get my patients now that are over 40 to increase their fat levels, even though they know it's a good thing, they just don't. They're still going for the low fat options. We're going to talk more about that momentarily. We've been told that our brains are fixed at birth, and there's nothing we can do about fixing it. And we also were told that our genetics determines our destiny. My background is actually in genetics and molecular biology. So I truly thought that once we knew the genome, yes, I'm a project of the late 90s when they were working on the genetic genome. And we said, once we discover the genetic blueprint of everyone, there'll be no more disease. Disease will be eradicated. Well, we know this to not be true. There's more disease today than ever before, even though we know our genome. Your genetics is not your destiny. So my goal for you for the end of this talk is to have strategies for a truly strong, healthy brain. So what that looks like is sharp, focused, energetic, joyful, and motivated, so you can tackle your to-do list. I mentioned earlier that I'm going to use that term dementia, but I want you to realize that we used to think of dementia as something you got in your 60s, 70s, 80s. We now know that it's actually a continuum, and we are seeing biometric markers in the brain as early as 35, as well as neuroplastic changes. So that's why I'm so excited to have that EEG scan in my clinic, so we can measure your brain at 35. We can measure it after perhaps a concussion. We can see if the things we're doing are making a change, are pushing the envelope. And why is this so important? This is so important because 40% of dementia is preventable. 40% of dementia cases worldwide are preventable. And if we can't prevent it, what we can do is delay it. And so if instead of getting dementia at 75, if we can push this back to 80, 85, 90, think of what we can do to impact you, me, your family, your friends. Another reason that we're in the brain health crisis when it comes to not to mental health this time, to cognitive decline, is this theory of the amyloid plaque hypothesis. Since the early 1990s, we have believed that it's these amyloid plaques in the brain that cause Alzheimer's. I remember I used to work at Union Villa, for anyone here who's in Unionville. So when I was in high school, I worked at Union Villa. My fifth year project in school was to study dementia and Alzheimer's. And I remember learning that the only way to diagnose dementia was through an autopsy, because you had to see these amyloid plaques in the brain. But we now know that people without symptoms of cognitive decline have these amyloid plaques in the brain. So these plaques are actually only a symptom. They are not the cause of dementia. And what this has done to us is we have put billions of dollars into researching getting rid of these amyloid plaques. And we now know that most of, if not all of those drugs actually do more harm than good. And the reason that this has been so detrimental to us, and why I'm getting on my high horse, is because these are the theories of cognitive decline that we should have been focusing on all this time. And if we had just put all that money into figuring out what to do to support these areas, we would be so much further ahead. And I want you to take a moment and just look at these theories and see how similar they are to just the theories of aging. Oxidative stress, the number one theory of aging, why we age. Well, that's the number one theory of cognitive decline. We're looking at protein folding, mitochondrial dysfunction, hormone depletion, vascular hypothesis that we're not getting enough oxygen to the brain, neuroinflammation. Let's go back to my daughter. It was neuroinflammation. She had strep. She had an infection in her body, and that infection caused her to have these massive neurological issues. She turned into a wild animal, truly a wild animal that would attack at any time. I didn't think that she was ever going to go back to school. I didn't think she would have any friends. I didn't think that she would graduate. And she's now at Queen's University studying psychotherapy. She went to Unionville High for drama. But my heart breaks for all of the children in the same place she was that didn't get it figured out that they had a strep infection or some kind of microbial infection. And we're just told, oh, you got anxiety, sweetheart. Let's put you on antidepressants. Imagine. Gut-brain axis. We know how important how the gut and the brain talk to each other. There's research in this in Parkinson's. There's research in Alzheimer's. There's research in anxiety, depression. Inflammation is going to make a difference. Environmental toxins, absolutely. Neurotoxins in the brain, mold, air pollution, heavy metals. Stress is going to play a role, hormone depletion, and that's a big piece that we're going to talk about today. And then there's some other ones as well. We're not going to get to everything today. This is just a little taste. I'm going to try to keep to 40, 45 minutes. So what I want us to do today is to take a moment and understand our risk factors. Because again, it's only when we have a reason to make a change. So for me, when I did my brain scan, I was able to decrease my age, my brain age, by 10 years. By having that measurable marker, I was then able to implement some tools to support my brain. And if I didn't have that marker, it's kind of like when you want to lose weight. If you don't have a scale, you don't have a pair of pants to compare yourself to, it's really hard to stick to the program. But when you know you have a measurable marker and a tool to work towards, then you can implement the changes that we're going to talk about. So without further ado, let's talk about some of those risk factors. Age, they say, and that is because we see as you get older, your risk goes higher, but I don't truly believe this. I truly believe that so many of those risk factors for aging, for brain cognition, can be reversed. What is a massive risk factor is diabetes and sugar dysregulation. They're now calling Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes. And the earlier the onset, the higher your risk. If you had gestational diabetes when you were pregnant, the higher your risk. Let's keep that in mind. Head injuries, depression. If you took antidepressant, there is an increased risk. Genetics, definitely. 30% if 30% increase in cognition risk if a close family member had Alzheimer's. But there's so many genes they're studying, but the most important one being the APOE. And I did mine, and yes, I do have the bad allele when it comes to the APOE gene. So we're going to talk more about that and what to do for it. But one of the biggest risk factors that we cannot change is our sex. So it's fact, women, you have 2 times the risk of developing dementia over men. And it's not because you live longer, as they used to tell us and led us to believe. It's because the estrogen in your brain is protecting you. Your estrogen, estrogen, as it starts to decrease, increases our chance of dementia. Your brain decreases. Brain size actually decreases when you're pregnant. So these shifts in hormones, the shifts in estrogen, the shifts in progesterone do cause brain changes. Here's another thing they led us to believe that we now know to not be true. They used to tell us that it's okay that your brain shrinks when you're pregnant. It's going to go back after 2 years. The only reason they said it was after 2 years because that's when the studies went to. This study showed that after 6 years, the brain had not gone back to its pre-pregnant state. And they're saying that probably never will go back. And it definitely won't if you don't do the steps, and we're going to talk about them today, to increase your brain size, which is called brain reserve, so important when it comes to brain health. So changes in estrogen and progesterone definitely can cause brain size to shrink, and size does matter. Estrogen and progesterone are your superpowers, and both are very neuroprotective. So I want you to think of estrogen as your anabolic steroid. One of them, testosterone too, but estrogen actually causes your brain to get bigger. It increases the dendritic spine synapses. It helps with organization of the brain. So estrogen, bigger, catabolic, whereas progesterone is more protective. So progesterone is going to help with neuroinflammation, and it's also going to help with anxiety, depression. Many of you today actually have been taking bioidentical hormones through me, and you'll know we'll say that progesterone is there for sleep, for relaxation, while estrogen is there to keep you young again. So when we talk about estrogen exposure being protective for your brain, your entire life exposure plays a role here when we look at your risk factor. So what age did you start menstruating? What age did you go through menopause? How many pregnancies did you have? All of these are going to play a factor when it comes to your risk. One of the reasons, as well as the protection that we mentioned in size, is also the way estrogen controls glucose metabolism. Many of you might be going through menopause right now, and you're noticing that your sugar metabolism is getting worse. Your HbA1c, your marker for sugar, seems to slowly be creeping up. And that's one of the things that we usually see go down when you do go on estrogen or estrogen and progesterone therapy. But the reason this is happening is one, the mitochondria is changing. So now it's not able to support the metabolism of the glucose as well. And two, your brain is going from almost being exclusively using glucose for energy metabolism to now using fats and ketones. And if it doesn't have the fats and ketones it needs, it simply catabolizes your white matter. And again, the brain's going to shrink. That's kind of what was happening during pregnancy too. The babies needed the fat, so the body was just going to take it right out of your brain and give it to your child. Now, who's the most risk for this is women who have that APOE4 variant. So this lipid metabolism is so important in women in general, and everyone in general, but especially women who have the APOE4 variant. Let's talk about hot flashes for a moment. Every hot flash you have causes a micro intensity in the gray matter of your brain. And these micro intensities have been proven to increase your risk of cognitive decline. And now you don't have to go on hormone therapy. We can simply decrease your hot flashes in other ways as well. Hot flashes are actually caused by the hypothalamus in your brain responding to the changes in estrogen and progesterone. So many things we can do for that if that's a problem. But do know that the more hot flashes you've had throughout your lifetime, the higher your risk of cognitive decline. And so let's talk about symptoms of minor cognitive impairment. And before we do that, so that's going to be on the left-hand side, take a moment and just look at the symptoms on the right-hand side. So these are just menopausal neurological symptoms, not even cognitive decline. What are some of these symptoms? That tip of the tongue phenomenon, when the word's right there on the tip of your tongue, but you just can't get it out. The loss of train of thought, forgetfulness, insomnia, depression, memory complaints, and then cognitive decline. These are just symptoms that we get from menopause. So let's go back to what I was saying earlier about the brain health crisis we're in. Are these symptoms of minor cognitive impairment? They're so similar. Tip of the tongue phenomenon, loss of train of thought, having a hard time making decisions. If you look down further, anxiety, depression, a short temper, aggression, a lack of interest. These are mirroring the symptoms we see through menopause. So what can we do to push the envelope so you're not going to experience any kind of memory decline, so that you can have a fast, focused, sharp brain at all times? We're going to get there. Here's a little bit about the APOE gene. I'm going to move on because I want to respect everyone's time. So when it comes to testing, there's a whole slew of different tests and biomarkers that I do like to do with all my patients. The APOE gene is one, especially for women. The omega-3 index test is one that I might do for people who have the APOE gene, but I don't do it as often because I really feel that the EEG brain scan that I mentioned earlier can give us so much information. It can let us know about anxiety, depression, your risk of ADHD symptoms, as well as how much energy and power you're able to put towards certain part of the brain. And that is going to show us what we can work on, what we can fix, so that you can be sharper, faster, quicker at all times. So I mentioned earlier that size matters. And so that's called brain reserve. So the bigger, stronger the bigger your brain, the more you have to lose before you're going to get any kind of symptoms. So we can see the little fishies there. The analogy here would be if there's a small hole at the bottom of each of those fish tanks, the fish that has more water in the bowl will take longer before the water drains out. So doing what we can to get a big brain, definitely important. Now, cognitive reserve, on the other hand, this is the way your brain thinks. And this is what many of you have been working on for who knows how many years, the last couple of decades. This is where you're doing those memory games, Sudoku, to try to increase the way, the different methods of the way the brain thinks. So just to think about it, if you're trying to get from point A to point B, and you only know one way to get there, then if there's a blockage, we're going to have problems. But if you've learned numerous other ways throughout time, then it's okay if that road's blocked. It's actually why we moved our clinic. We used to be right on Unionville Main Street, but we're about to have all that construction happening on Unionville Main Street. And there was no other way in. Whereas now that we moved to Station Lane, there are back ways into the clinic, two off of Highway 7, as well as off Unionville Main Street. So we've almost created our cognitive reserve when it comes to how to get to the clinic. So learning how to do other strategies. All right, I'm going to skip all these for the interest of time. Oh, and I mentioned this one already, how all of the different things that we can measure with that brain scan. Cheap, affordable. All right, so this is what you've been waiting for. What are some of the strategies we can take to have that sharper brain? So we mentioned that brain reserve, size matters. So the first thing we need to do is to stop the shrinkage. So decreasing neurotoxins is a big one. So alcohol, how much alcohol is okay? The more studies we see coming out, the lower the number. I remember getting, when I was in first year, or I just graduated, I saw an article written by the French that said up to 6 glasses of red wine a day was beneficial. I used to carry that one around. Now more research is showing that's not really to be true. Maybe 1 or 2 glasses, only if that's because it's going to be relaxing for you. And we do know that having that relaxing phase, decreasing stress is important, because too much stress actually causes shrinkage as well. Stress causes neurons in the brain to shrivel up and die. Heavy metals. How much exposure have you had to heavy metals? I mean, my parents used to tell me they used to play with mercury. People tell me they're getting their fillings out with pride because they know how detrimental heavy metals can be. But sometimes I shriek inside because those heavy metals, as you're taking them out, that exposure might put your brain at an increased risk as they're off-gassing. So really understanding, if you do take out your fillings in your mouth, how you're doing it. And there are very strict rules that a good dentist would do taking those fillings out. There's even a study or two showing that Botox might actually have some correlation to memory decline, but I'm still investigating that. What about hormone therapy? We know that hormones, estrogen, can actually help with the size of the brain. Well, here's a systematic review. And if you've ever read studies, a systematic review and a meta-analysis, what they're doing is they're looking at all of the studies that have ever been written on this topic. They throw away the ones that they don't think were done well. And then they look at what the results are based on that. How many studies say different things. So this was looking at over 6 million women. It was done just last year, last October. And the findings show that women who took hormones in midlife to treat their menopausal symptoms were less likely to develop dementia. Now, is hormone therapy right for you? I'm actually doing a webinar on that in a couple of months. And you can listen to that, or we can have a little appointment and chat about it. It's not for everyone. And I've definitely put many people on it, and I've definitely suggested for others that we don't go on it. So it's not the be all and end all, but for many people, it is going to push the envelope. In full disclosure, I recently put myself on hormones. Again, I carry the APOE gene. And I'm getting to that phase. I'm closer to 50 now than I am to 40. So, and I've noticed better sleep. I didn't used to get many hot flashes, but those already gone away. I am noticing that my brain is more ready to answer. That tip of the tongue phenomenon isn't there, only when I get distracted, and my phone did distract me earlier, so I do apologize for that. But, I'm happy to have a candid talk with anybody on if hormones might be right for you. Another strategy is exercise. And if there's one thing you get from today's talk that I'm going to talk about is exercise. Exercise, exercise, exercise. So how much? Well, just for brain reserve. So this is just for brain size. Just 4,000 steps a day has been shown in elderly people, which they say is 65 and up when they're doing the studies. Just 4,000 steps a day, it will increase gray matter. But they need to be complex. So if you're just going for walks, if you're just using the treadmill or the Stairmaster, it's not going to push the envelope as much as a dance class or a boxing class, something where you're doing exercise as well as having to think. I teach body combat at Good Life. There's a reason that I'm doing that. If anybody wants to come and try a class with me, let me know. I will get you in. Fats. So we talked about lipid peroxidation in the brain, how important that is. Well, studies are showing that the higher your omega-3 levels in the brain, the better blood flow, the better memory, cognition, learning in general. And what this does do is it increases the size of your brain. So omega-3 fats will actually help with that brain reserve, and so important for women who are pregnant, so important for going through menopause. Anytime where we're going to see fluctuations in the brain, we want to make sure that we are working on that brain reserve, that brain size. Size really does matter. All right, moving on to the cognitive reserve. So I guess I already explained this slide to you. So what is going to help? Social engagement, absolutely. This is a huge one when it comes to staying sharp and focused. So getting out, making sure you're spending time with your friends. You know what doesn't help? All those hours of crosswords and Sudokus that you've been doing. They found that learning in one domain does not carry over to multiple domains. So by doing your Sudoku, you're just getting better at doing Sudoku, which is great. But what you need to do is change it up. So as soon as it's no longer novel, as soon as you're getting good at it, you need to change. So what they found actually that did push the envelope when it came to cognition, especially in people 65 and older, was Rise of Nations. So this is a strategic online game. And quite frankly, the people doing it in the study, they found it hard. They found it frustrating. There were many moving parts they had to focus on at once, many different outcomes. But that's what was needed to have the learning in one domain carry over into another. What about learning a new language? I know we've always been told that learning a new language is going to be important for cognition, and that meditation is important for cognition. I actually did a talk to a few weeks ago, an international talk, and there was a lot of bioenergetics. And so I thought this will be great. I'm going to find information on meditation and cognition. And when I found the study on language, it almost seems silly. Of course, language is going to make a difference. Of course, meditation is going to make a difference. And what they found was that neither actually helped when they were looking for improvements in cognition. Wordle doesn't help. Crosswords don't help. Learning a new language is great for learning a new language. And initially, we're going to see some cognition changes. But again, once it becomes something that you're good at and it's not novel and new, move on to something else. As far as meditation for brain restoration, hanging out with a house plant seemed to push the envelope just as much. So definitely get some house plants and surround yourself by them. Oxidative stress. This is probably the biggest cause of aging in general, and something I really want you all to think about. When we start to get brain fatigue, when we don't have the words right at our fingertips, often what's happening is we're not producing as much ATP, so as much energy in the brain. And this is often due to an increase in oxidative stress. So I'm going to explain it to you quickly. This is your mitochondria. Yes, go back to high school biology. And we take that one molecule of glucose and we put it through the electron transport chain in the mitochondria, and we get this beautiful ATP. Remember, you had to learn this, 36 or 38 ATP molecules depending, and that's what gives us energy. That's what allows us to be sharp, focused, energetic, brain there for you at a moment's notice. Now, you do produce a few free radicals, but as long as everything's working well, we can quench those free radicals. The problem arises as we begin to age. all of a sudden our mitochondria don't look so nice and rounded anymore. We're seeing the aging. So now when the glucose molecule goes through, think of it almost like a rusted machine. We don't get as many ATP molecules. We now get brain fatigue, brain fog, insomnia. It's hard to fall asleep. And worse, we get a lot of these oxidative species. So ROS is what you'll often see the short form for it. Now to put this into, so free radicals. And if you've ever come into my clinic and we've done the dark field microscope, I can often see this and I can actually show you your cells that are starting to oxidize faster than we want. So what's truly happening is those cells are aging faster than we want. And the problem with these free radicals is that they can cause damage. To put it into perspective, a single DNA strand is being damaged more than 700,000 times a day. But you're a great machine, you're able to quench it. Your body creates natural signals that decreases your oxidative stress. You're taking in antioxidants, your vitamin C, A, E, selenium, zinc, fats, phenols, all of these are working on that oxidative system. But as we age, it just might not be enough, especially if we have a lot of exposure to what's causing that oxidative stress. So inflammation in general, neurotoxins, infection. And yes, stress in general does play a role. When I tell people that I can see their oxidative stress, they immediately think, oh, mental stress. Mental stress does not necessarily cause oxidative stress. It definitely can. And we know that stress is, the cause of almost 70% of diseases out there. It is so detrimental. Your cells go into what's called cell protection mode. But inflammation, neurotoxins, infection are so detrimental when it comes to brain health. So this is one of the reasons that I got the NanoBee. So if you've been to my clinic before, that's that machine where you're actually breathing in moist air. And what that is correcting those signaling pathways for oxidative stress. So we know the NanoBee supports cellular health, it helps with cognition, and it just helps with anti-aging in general. If you've never used it, I'm offering everybody who came to this talk today 3 free sessions. So just drop us an email, let Evelyn know, and we will get you on the NanoBee. All right, I'm going to stress it again. Exercise. Exercise is going to outbeat food. It's going to outbeat any of the brain games you can do, any of the supplements you can take. Exercise is the #1 thing you can do to support cognition and keep your brain young, to have energy, focus, and have it at a moment's notice. Exercise helps maintain glucose metabolism. One of the theories of cognitive decline is not enough oxygen to the brain. Exercise helps push oxygen to the brain. It decreases our stress. It improves our mitochondrial efficiency. So that last slide I showed about oxidative stress, mitochondria is going to improve this. It lowers your inflammation. It increases your brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And we're going to talk more about that momentarily, because after the age of 50 or so, we see this dramatically decrease. And this is one of the reasons when this is decreased, they say that it's harder for us to form memories. Good news, we can increase your brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and exercise is the #1 way to do it. And exercise also increases your brain reserve. Remember earlier we said just 4,000 steps a day is going to increase your brain reserve. So at a minimum, we're all getting that. But the harder, more intense exercise we can do, the more brain-derived neurotrophic factor and the sharper your brain's going to be. How often? I'm going to say you should be exercising every day. Every single day, you should be exercising with intention. So those 4,000 steps, ideally, it's not just as you're generally walking around. Hopefully, it's you're having to put on a sports bra and get out and do the work. And we can't forget about strength training. Grip strength is linked to overall aging. It's the #1 predominator of if you're aging or not. So increasing your grip strength is so important. Let's talk about the brain-derived neurotrophic factor for a moment. If you haven't heard this word before, you're going to start hearing it more and more because there is so many articles coming out on this. Brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF, is a molecule, it's a protein that your body makes in the brain and in the muscles. It helps with metabolism, aging, cognitive function, behavior, and memory. I'm going to say that again. BDNF helps with metabolism. How many of us are working on metabolism, either to lose weight or to help sugar regulation? It helps with aging, something we're all working towards every day. It helps with cognitive function, behavior, and memory. This is the key to neuroplasticity and neurogenesis. I don't think we should have talks this late anymore. So it really is what's helping us with learning and forming new memories. And what is the number one way that we're going to increase it? Oh, before that. So low levels of brain-derived neurotrophic factor have been associated with pretty much everything bad. Parkinson's, leaky gut, anxiety, depression. And so the number one thing that we're going to do to increase brain-derived neurotrophic factor is exercise. Exercise, exercise, and high-intensity exercise. So HIIT programs, fabulous. We want to get that. We want to build lactic acid. We want to get your body hot. And if we can't do high intensity for even short periods of time, at least moderate intense exercise. So the higher the better. Every minute counts, and there's no threshold on the maximum amount that's beneficial. But if we can only do moderate intense, then we want to go for about 40 minutes at least 65% of your heart rate. So I would say that you want to do this about 2 or 3 times a week, that 40 minutes. You want to do HIIT a couple of times, and then we want to do some weight training as well. And so what about those of you who like to stroll? A lot of my patients say, well, I walk every day. Is that okay? It's great for brain reserve, but it is not going to push the envelope when it comes to brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And the reason behind this is because we don't actually know how that brain-derived neurotrophic factor that we're making in the muscles gets into the brain. How does it cross the blood-brain barrier? And the theory is that it might be the lactic acid. So that means that you have to actually be producing the lactic acid at that high intensity in order to increase your brain-derived neurotrophic factor and increase learning, memory, and mood. Or perhaps it's the heat. By working out and increasing your body temperature, that might be how that brain-derived neurotrophic factor is entering the brain. And the reason we think this is because we're also seeing increased levels of BDNF in saunas. So use your sauna if you have one. Go in a hot tub. Absolutely, this is going to increase your cognition. Another thing I do want you all to do is to start the war on sugar. Sugar has been known to cause aggression, mood changes, increase inflammation. It causes microbial changes, and it causes your neurons to shrink. And they've been lying to us. The food industry makes us think that yogurt is a health food. Compare that right now to a Kit Kat bar. They have the same amount of sugar, the same amount of protein, calcium, iron. And so if you really feel like you need to have that sugar fix, I'd almost rather you have the Kit Kat bar. At least then you know what you're having, and that might be more satisfying than thinking you're eating something that's healthy. And again, they've been lying to us. They have put this lie onto us as early as the 1950s. They knew that sugar was detrimental to the brain. But before the article was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, the Sugar Research Foundation was able to get a hold of the article and make changes. And what they did was they downplayed sugar's role, and they pointed their finger at fat and cholesterol. And this is what has created the generations of us who is afraid of fat, who is afraid of cholesterol. Yet we now know we need fat, we need cholesterol. They are not our enemy, but it is ingrained in our brain so hard that it is hard for us to believe that. My patients are still going for low-fat options, yet low-fat options have higher amount of calories, higher amount of sugar in them. And so they are still causing these issues. And so sleep quality, we know sleep is impacted by sugar, cognitive decline, aggression. So start the war on sugar. Let's bring down your HbA1c. Let's think about gut health as well. So this is an interesting study. They looked at how much probiotics can improve cognitive impairment. So this was in the older population, but I definitely think we can extrapolate this to a younger population as well. And so this was looking at 702 adults. So it's another systematic review. And check this out. Anything that's green shows that it was significantly statistically significant. So memory improvement, statistically significant. Cognitive function, our total antioxidant capacity. So again, bringing down that oxidative stress, that slide I showed you about mitochondria, that goes hand in hand with glutathione. Many of you have come into my clinic and gotten IV glutathione because we know it decreases oxidative stress and really pushes that pathway. One of the things I didn't mention was I test homocysteine levels in as many of my patients as I can, because this, again, is a modifiable marker for cognitive decline as well as heart risk and so many other things. And we can fix it. We can fix it with things like glutathione. So think about taking your probiotic. How often? I typically suggest kind of like your garden. In the summertime, you're going to go out there, you're going to weed all the weeds, you're going to plant lots of plants, but then throughout the summer, we just weed a little bit as we go along. Same with your probiotics. Do 1 or 2 rounds of a good multi-strain, but then after that, only go for it every now and then, every couple of days, add something in. You all brush your teeth every day? Do you all floss every day? Mouth health is so important and so linked to brain health. We do know that the bacteria gingivitis has been found in the brains of people with Alzheimer's. So there is a link. Somehow that microbe can get into the brain. Oh, I think about my daughter with her strep infection and how that caused the brain reaction. So mouth, so important. When I was studying in Germany, they do a panoramic view of everybody's teeth, and it's not just the x-ray that we do, but it's more intensive to look for inflammation in the mouth, because we do also know that just gingivitis in general is going to increase inflammation. Just like the gut, if we have a lot of overgrowth of bad bacteria, that too is going to increase inflammation, and that is going to play a role in the brain. Supplements, we mentioned omega-3. Omega-3 is definitely my favorite, knowing that it's going to increase brain reserve, make the brain bigger, knowing that it's going to increase brain-derived neurotrophic factor, definitely something that if you're not doing, you should. And studies seem to show that there's no upper limit. It's really just what you can tolerate. Take your probiotic, take your magnesium, and let's really prioritize sleep. Sleep reduces stress, it reduces inflammation, it helps solidify memories, it enables growth and repair. Poor sleep has been linked to higher amyloid plaques in the brain. And we do know that insomnia might actually be a prodrome, so come before we see massive cognitive decline. We really see those changes. And many of you are causing damage to our brains by not allowing your natural melatonin out. So when we fight at 10 o'clock, you know how you're starting to feel tired, but then you fight it and you get your second wind? That is your melatonin that was coming out to help you get sleepy going away again. So listen to your cycles. When you're getting sleepy, your melatonin's coming out. Melatonin is an antioxidant, and it's a hormone you're producing that's so important for brain health. And don't be afraid of it. If you are fighting it and staying up late, it's not a bad thing to occasionally take a melatonin. How much sleep should you get? More than 7, but less than 8.5. There are some studies to show that too much sleep can be detrimental as well. So good sleep hygiene, making bedtime earlier, no screen time at least 1 hour before bed, supplement if necessary. And so these are just a few of the things that we're going to recommend, but the most comprehensive and the easiest for you to do right now. Other risk factors, we talked about HbA1c, homocysteine, having good vitamin D levels. So these are things that we can test for. But really, the thing that I'm so excited about is testing your brain health. Here's my scan. So you can see the gray here. That was me and I was normal. I teach fitness classes. I'm a naturopath. I do a lot of good things for my brain, but I didn't want to just be in the middle of normal. I wanted to be exceptional. I wanted to be having more power going to different parts of my brain. So you can see the second time I did it was this black line here. So that's showing how much power my brain's putting towards certain areas. The brain reaction time was the exact same. And that one is harder to change usually, but we don't want to, usually that's going to be fairly similar. And then your physical reaction time. And I'm not showing the other slide that shows anxiety, depression, cognitive support, as well as ADHD symptoms. But I know you all want to be here when you're in your 80s and 90s. You look at this picture and you think that's going to be me. But I have to tell you, it's not. If you don't take the time now to exercise, to implement these strategies, we are seeing slow deterioration in most people, but you can stop it right now. So I've even made this brain scan. I've bundled it into a brain bundle, which makes the scan alone only $200 if you buy it along with a naturopathic appointment from me. So if you're interested, definitely hop on a call with me afterwards. Just shoot us an email, and I would love to tell you more about what we can do to push the envelope for brain health. My motto is measure it, mend it, maximize it. So after we measure it, we're going to do all of the things we talked about today to mend it. And then I have an entire health studio with different wellness tools where, over thousands, tens of thousands of dollars to maximize your brain. And so these are just some of the different things, Brain Tap, the NanoV. So please ask me some questions now or set up a time to talk, and let's see what we can do to really support your brain.